O sol castigava o povoado de Redstone com uma luz seca e impiedosa. As ruas de terra enegrecida fervilhavam entre silêncios cortados por cochichos carregados de julgamento e olhares que pesavam no ar empoeirado. Clara, jovem e bela, caminhava com o rosto erguido, mas os ombros caídos, como um frágil ícone exposto ao capricho cruel dos homens que a tratavam como mercadoria. Naquele canto esquecido da fronteira, a beleza era moeda valiosa e Clara, prêmio à venda. Redstone era um lugar onde a dureza do deserto refletia-se na alma de seus habitantes. Casas improvisadas, baixos madeirames reagindo ao vento carregado de areia, a visão brezenta do horizonte que incitava medo e desconfiança. Ali, o preconceito vinha grudado como o pó que ninguém podia escapar, e a sobrevivência era um jogo sem misericórdia. Os rostos cerrados e as vozes ásperas moldavam uma comunidade onde a esperança vinha embrulhada em temor. Clara sentia o peso de tudo aquilo sobre si. Seu cabelo preto caía em ondas que pareciam prender a luz do sol, e seus olhos castanhos brilhavam com uma tristeza calada. Criada para ser objeto, seu destino já tinha dono, um casamento arranjado por conveniências e aparência, sem espaço para sua vontade ou sonhos. Entre paredes invisíveis, sua voz era um sussurro apagado pela brutalidade de quem dominava o território. A festa que se armava aquela noite era menos celebração e mais confirmação de uma sentença. Clara, vestida com um simples vestido claro que mal disfarçava sua fragilidade, era o centro dos olhares devoradores. Os homens do povoado cercavam-na, embebidos em grosseria e cobiça, enquanto mulheres observavam com inveja e resignação. Em meio às risadas falsas, o ar carregava a tensão sufocante de uma promessa de posse e submissão. Do meio da multidão, Nahuel, o guerreiro Apache, se mantinha em silêncio, seu olhar profundo e atento. A pele marcada pelo sol e cicatrizes falavam de batalhas vividas, mas era sua postura firme e respeitosa que mais chamava atenção. Ele não participava da ronda cruel, e a forma como seus olhos pairavam sobre Clara demonstrava um interesse genuíno, uma empatia silenciosa em meio à barbaridade do momento. Era como se impendesse sem palavras a injustiça que ela carregava. Quando o marido, um homem grosso e de olhar carregado de ameaça, se aproximou de Clara com mãos bruscas, o murmúrio da festa se transformou em um sussurro tenso. O corpo tenso dela endureceu em meio aos olhares que já haviam se fechado em julgamento. Unidos pelo instinto e pela honra que seguia, uma sabedoria ancestral, Nahuel deu um passo discreto e firme entre o agressor e Clara. Seu gesto rápido, mas contido, foi suficiente para interromper o avanço violento sem alarmar os que ainda assistiam. Uma mão pousou levemente no braço do marido, o olhar fixo e carregado de um peso que não aceitava a violência gratuita. Os olhares imediatamente se voltaram para Nahuel, a surpresa e a dúvida crescendo como uma onda silenciosa. Murmúrios começaram a se espalhar, enquanto ele mantinha a postura imperturbável, protegendo em silêncio aquela mulher que todos viam como uma posse vulnerável. O povoado, atento ao sinal de desafio inesperado, começou a experimentar um novo tipo de tensão. Um conflito que estava apenas começando a se desenrolar naquela noite de poeira e esperança retida. Many journeyers who follow our frontier legends have told us that fate, or YouTube's sneaky algorithm, sometimes unwinds their subscriptions without warning. Before the next dangerous trail and new twist reveal themselves, take a quick look below the video and make sure you're still enlisted with our band so you don't lose the thread of the tale. We don't want you to miss any voices echoing from this valley. Check your subscription now and join our saga. Clara's days darkened, like the lengthening shadows cast by the setting sun over Redstone. After Nawel's quiet but firm intervention at her wedding feast, the winds of change blew harsh and cold, stirring whispers into biting whispers that gnawed at her soul. The weight she bore grew heavier under the watchful eyes of her husband and townsfolk alike. The brutal man whose possession she was now looked at her with a doubled fury, his anger swelling. Every time she dared meet Nawel's gaze, burning with silent rebellion. At home, Clara's world shrank even further. Her husband's gestures grew more violent, masking his fear behind clumsy threats and reckless hands. Every word he uttered was a reminder of her captivity, every glance a warning. Yet beneath her fear blossomed a confusing and fierce curiosity, one that no chains could hold. Nawel, with his steady calm and unwavering dignity, whispered a promise of something she had never tasted: freedom. She found herself drawn to him in moments stolen between daylight's prying eyes and the oppressive silence of night. Nawel moved among the dust and suspicion like a shadow, careful not to leave footprints that endangered those fragile ties. His eyes, dark pools of wisdom, reflected a life tempered by loss and honor. He was caught between two worlds, a proud son of the Apache, bound by his tribe's code, and a silent guardian to a woman who represented a refuge from his own kind of battle. Though his heart tilted toward her, he knew that each stolen moment risked both their lives. The ancient fears of boundaries crossed whispered warnings that could not be ignored. The uneasy peace shattered one gray dawn when the first crack of tension ripped through Redstone. A small but angry band of white men from the nearby fort began maneuvering with hostile intent. Their eyes burned with suspicion and old hatreds, focusing like a blade on Nawel and his people. Rumors spread like wildfire, fanned by fear and ignorance. The Apache were to be hunted, a threat to be extinguished before any more crosses were walked. That afternoon, Clara watched from the window as men armed, with rifles and cold resolve, gathered on the outskirts of the town. Lips twisted with bitter resolve, they whispered among themselves about the Apache menace, preparing a chase that would settle scores with blood. The crowd in Redstone, divided between those who favored peace and those driven by prejudice, held its breath. Clara's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and an unfamiliar courage that began to rise from deep within. When Nawel appeared at the edge of town, his silhouette framed against the burnt orange sky, Clara's pulse quickened. He approached with a calm that belied the storm swirling in their midst. Their eyes met, an unspoken exchange of trust and warning. Nawel lowered his voice, telling her of the men's plans, the hunt that would not stop at him, but would threaten anyone who stood by his side. Even as the daylight faded into the bruised hues of evening, the invisible noose tightened. Clara knew her existence was now a spark in a powder keg. Her place beside Nawel was a risk few understood, and fewer still were willing to abide. The town's silent watchers stirred, and hate sharpened its claws with every breath. Underneath the silver gleam of the moon, whispers traveled from door to door. Men whispered of vengeance, of purging the town from any trace of defiance. The frontier's harsh laws did not grant mercy to those who dared cross unwritten boundaries. Yet, amid the fear, there was a growing pulse of rebellion, quiet, fragile, but present. Clara's hands trembled as she packed what little she dared claim as hers. The cold metal of her resolve clashed with the warm ache of longing that Noelle stirred in her. Blood. This was no longer just a struggle for survival. It had become a fight for dignity, for hope. She glanced once more at the door, knowing that once crossed, the threshold would bring no turning back. Nahuel's voice broke the silence, low and steady. He spoke of paths hidden among the jagged rocks beyond the valley, places where the fort's shadow could not reach. He offered a chance, dangerous. Yes, but a chance to claim the freedom that neither she nor his people had known in years. They would have to face not only the men who hunted them, but the deep-rooted fears of their own communities. As night deepened, the distant howl of hounds and the pounding hoofbeats of men grew closer, merging with Clara's quickened breaths and the thudding of her rebellious heart. The walls around her were crumbling, but a new fortress was being built, one forged from trust and a shared will to defy a cruel world. Outside, a group of white men readied themselves under the black sky, their faces set like stone and their purpose clear: to track down Nahuel and his kin. The line between hunter and hunted blurred, drawing them into a peril that could consume all they held dear. And in the stillness before the storm, a promise hung in the air. Danger was coming to Redstone, and the hunt for the Apache and those who dared stand with him was about to ignite. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the creaking floorboards whispered beneath her cautious steps. The dim light of the flickering oil lamp barely reached the corners of the room where they had met. An unspoken sanctuary carved out from a world of harsh judgment. Nahuel stood close, his presence steady like the ancient oaks that guarded the land beyond Redstone. Tonight, the silence between them was filled with the weight of words not yet spoken, and the fragile threads of trust being woven slowly, carefully. She looked up at him, eyes searching. The stories she had heard around whispered fires had painted him as nothing more than a shadow. A fierce Apache warrior, untamable and distant. But the man who now met her gaze held a different truth. A man bound by honor, whose strength softened when faced with her pain. His voice, when he spoke, was low, steady, a balm against the cruel echoes of her life. "You do not have to be what they want you to be," Nahuel said, his words carrying a promise wrapped in ancient wisdom. "Your spirit is your own. We forget that sometimes here, but it is yours to reclaim." Clara's lips trembled as she absorbed the gravity of his offer. In the quiet hours, she shared shards of herself, the suffocating fear, the stolen dreams, the invisible chains that tied her to a life not chosen. Noelle listened not as a stranger, but as one who understood the weight of being caged, in body or soul. As the night deepened, their conversations drifted to his world. The rituals, the stories passed down through generations, the codes that shaped lives carved from the same unforgiving earth. In his presence, Clara glimpsed a freedom she had never dared imagine. A freedom not of physical escape alone, but of being seen, respected. Yet beyond the walls of their secret retreat, danger loomed. The oppressive gaze of her husband grew heavier. With each day, his fury a storm gathering strength. Rumors spread like wildfire that the Apache warrior's interest in Clara was a blight upon the town's fragile order, a threat to be extinguished. One afternoon, word reached Clara from an unexpected ally, Martha, a woman whose own story echoed her desperation. Martha's eyes held the quiet sorrow of shared suffering and a fierce resolve born from years beneath the shadow of an abusive husband. She came to Clara with hushed urgency, slipping a folded scrap of parchment into her trembling hand. "You're more than what he says you are," Martha whispered. "There are those who watch and wait. But be warned, he plans to make you an example. If you don't break, the cost will be more than your spirit." The threat hung between them like a dark cloud. Clara's fingers clenched the note, heart pounding with a growing sense of peril. Her husband, fueled by a venomous need to reclaim control, intended to make her punishment a warning, irrevocable sentence. Nawel's eyes darkened when Clara confided in him, a fire burning beneath the stoic calm. He spoke of honor and protection, his voice raw with the weight of his tribe's laws and the burdens they carried. "This is no longer just your fight, Clara," he said. "If they hurt you, they hurt the balance we all depend on. I will stand with you, even if the heavens fall." Fear battled hope within her, but in Nawel's steadiness, she found a wellspring of courage previously buried. Their worlds, so long kept apart by prejudice and silence, began to entwine in rebellion. At night, beneath the vast canopy of stars, Clara learned the language of the land through Nawel's stories. He spoke of patience and resilience, of scars that told tales not of weakness, but endurance. She saw his eyes soften as he recounted memories of his people's struggles, their relentless fight for a place in a world that sought to erase them. In the dim glow of candlelight, Nawel traced the lines of her face with reverence. "Beauty that belongs to no man," he murmured. "It belongs to the earth and sky, to the rivers and winds that carry your soul." But their fragile bond was a perilous spark in Redstone's tinderbox. The town's whispers grew to murmurs, then roars, as her husband's jealousy festered in dark corners. The cold stares of neighbors became daggers, slicing at Clara's resolve. Late one evening, as shadows lengthened over the cracked boards of their homes, Martha returned with grave news. "He's taken others with him, men from the town who share his cruelties. They say you must be broken in a way everyone will see, not just for you, but to remind us all who holds power." Clara's hands shook, the bitter taste of dread curling on her tongue. Her spirit, once caged and silent, now burned with a fire that refused to yield. She glanced toward the window, where the uncertain moon cast pale light over the sleeping town. Nawel's gaze met hers, steadying and filled with fierce determination. Whatever comes, you will not face it alone. Their shared glance was a silent vow, a defiance shattering the cruel expectations binding them. In the whispered promises of the night, Clara found a newfound strength, even as the noose tightened. The days that followed brought furtive meetings beneath ancient oaks, stolen words, and quiet plans. Clara learned to read the signs of danger, the subtle shifts in townsfolk's attitudes, the gathering of hardened men plotting her downfall. Martha became a quiet anchor, offering hidden knowledge of her husband's next moves, a map through the shadowed corridors of fear and power. Her solidarity was a balm, a rare gift in a world where women were too often enemies or silent victims. Still, the cost mounted. Clara's heart wavered between hope and despair as she sensed the widening chasm between the townspeople and herself. The woman who dared to love beyond the borders set by prejudice. One chilling morning, the threat crystallized into plan. Her husband would make her a spectacle, a grim lesson carved in flesh and fear to halt any flicker of rebellion that stirred in others. Clara stood at the edge of the town's dusty square, where whispers traveled fast and judgment waited like a predator. Her hands clenched at the hem of her dress, knuckles white with the torment of choices she never sought to face. Nahuel's words echoed within her, a call to courage deeper than the southwestern sky. The Allies' warnings, the whispers of rebellion, the fragile threads of hope they spun together, it all led to this precipice. Behind the town's faded wooden facades, a darkness stirred. Somewhere in the distance, the deadly dance of control and defiance was set in motion. Clara knew the path ahead was fraught with peril, that the fight for her life and soul would demand every ounce of strength she could muster. But the spark between her and Nahuel kindled a fire neither fear nor hate could easily snuff out. And then, as the sun dipped behind the barren hills, painting the sky with bruised colors, Martha's final, whispered warning broke the heavy air. Your husband plans to make you an example, one that will cost you your life. The night welcomed them with a cold embrace as Clara and Nahuel fled the suffocating walls of Redstone. Their footsteps tread softly over the dusty trail leading into the shadowed heart of a forested clearing, a fragile sanctuary carved from nature's indifferent hand. Every rustle, every snap of twig beneath their hurried steps sang with the tension of 1,000 unseen eyes tracking their escape. Nahuel's breath came steady and measured, but Clara's chest heaved with a cocktail of fear and hope that tasted both bitter and sweet on her tongue. The weight of the wrathed husband and the sneering society they left behind pressed heavily upon them, but here in this whispered refuge beyond the town's cruel gaze, something new and unspoken began to bind them closer. As they settled near a small fire, now well kindled with practiced ease, the flickering light cast shadows that danced across their faces, hard edges softened for a moment by the intimacy of shared refuge. Nahuel's eyes, deep and resolute, met Clara's with an intensity that spoke of unshakable resolve and guarded tenderness. Here is where the law of men fades, but ours does not, he said, voice low and heavy with the echoes of his ancestors. I owe you protection, even if it means defying the rules of my people, even if it means risking all I am." Clara swallowed hard, the gravity of his confession settling over her like the cold night air. She saw beyond the strong frame, beyond the painted scars and stoic silence, a man haunted by the same cages that bound her, though his were forged by bloodlines and hunted ghosts. Her fingers trembled as they brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. "And what if they find us here?" she whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the stillness. "If those mercenaries from the town, men hired to drag me back, come for you as well?" Nawel inhaled deeply, the strike of wind through the branches as a grim reminder. "Then we fight, but not just with weapons, with every ounce of spirit and cunning we possess." A silence stretched between them before Nawel spoke again, this time unlocking a door to memories rarely shared. "My father taught me that honor is not just strength of arm, but strength of heart. Every choice we make echoes beyond ourselves. Protecting you is a debt I claim, not for your beauty or the world's dangers, but because your soul demands it." Clara's breath caught. For the first time in years, she felt the strange stirring of something neither fear nor despair. Not quite hope, but the shadow of it. Yet beneath the fragile thread of warmth, dread gnawed relentlessly. The world beyond their clearing was relentless. Suddenly, distant voices rose, breaking the fragile peace like thunderclaps against glass. Shapes pressed against the tree line, the silhouettes of men encircling their safe haven. Mercenaries hired by the town's elite, their eyes greedy for the prize they believed Clara to be. The unnerving clink of weapons reminded Clara that freedom was a brittle dream. Nawel moved swiftly to shield her, his hand firm on her shoulder. "We cannot let them corner us," he murmured urgently. "We must choose our moment carefully. Stay close." The mercenaries' leader stepped into the firelight, a grim visage marked by scars and the hollow gleam of fanaticism. He spat words thick with venom. "We know she's here, Apache. Surrender the girl and your wounds might heal. Resist and you take death for both of you." Clara's heart pounded fiercely, yet beneath the terror, a fierce defiance sparked. These men sought to own her once more, to mark her as property and fear. But beside her, Nawel stood unwavering, a living bastion of resistance. "You will not lay hands on her." Nawel's voice was steel wrapped in warning. "I carry the blood and honor of my people, and I will not bow." A cruel sneer twisted the leader's lips, and with a sudden shout, the mercenaries surged forward. Steel met flesh in a brutal dance beneath the ancient trees. Nawel fought with the desperate rage of a cornered wolf, each strike fueled by love and the inescapable duty to shield Clara. But strength falters when outnumbered, and despite his skill, Nawel faltered, staggered back as a blade found its mark deep in his side. Blood blossomed warm and dark against his skin. The fire flickered, casting a haunted glow across his grimmest face. Clara's scream tore through the night as she rushed to his side, hands trembling but resolute. The man who sought to reclaim her now loomed closer, eyes cold with victory. But Clara's spirit had been forged in the crucible of fear and endurance. She would not yield. Desperation sharpened her senses. She grabbed a fallen branch, the rough wood heavy in her grasp. With a sudden cry, born from every stolen moment of pain and courage. She swung fiercely, catching their leader off guard. He stumbled, the balance tipping for the briefest heartbeat. "Run!" Nawel gasped, blood slick on his lips, eyes burning with a fierce command. Clara hesitated, only a heartbeat, before clutching his arm to aid his staggered steps. Guided by grit and growing strength, they vanished into the protective embrace of the forest, the shouts of their pursuers fading behind the curtain of night. Under the canopy, Nawel leaned heavily against a gnarled tree. His breath came ragged, pain sharpening every inhale, but his gaze held Clara's fast and fierce. "You saved me," he said, with a faint smile, shadows of pride touching the edges of his exhaustion. "No," Clara replied, voice steady despite the tremble within. "We save each." The forest around them whispered ancient secrets. The night, humming with the promise of devils yet to come and battles yet unfought. In the quiet between heartbeats, Clara's resolve crystallized. Her hands, once trembling with fear, now clung to Nawel, not only for support, but as a symbol of her will, the will to fight, to defy, to rebel against a world intent on breaking her. But outside, in the echoes of their flight, the chase was far from over. Powerful men, with money and rage to burn, would come hunting, relentless and merciless. And Clara knew the fight for their freedom was only just beginning. The days after their narrow escape weighed heavily on Clara and Nawel as they found themselves encircled not just by the forest's quiet shadows, but by the fraught legacy of hatred and fear lurking. In even their tentative refuge, though the Apache village offered sanctuary, acceptance was a fragile thread stretched taut by centuries of wounds and broken trust. When they finally crossed the threshold into the village's earthy heart, Clara could feel the eyes, sharp, guarded, assessing her every step. The dusty ground, trodden by generations of warriors, elders, and families bound by blood and survival, echoed a history hers could never erase. She was an outsider, a living challenge to old boundaries. Nawel's younger sister, Taina, emerged from the crowd like a wary flame. Her gaze was a mixture of protective loyalty to her brother and the ingrained suspicion bred by years of conflict. For all her grace and quiet strength, Taina carried the weight of their people's fears. That a woman like Clara, steeped in the world that had cast them as enemies, might bring ruin with her presence. Clara met Taina's eyes with neither defiance nor submission, but with the soft edge of someone who had learned to survive beneath storms far harsher than disapproval. She stepped forward, voice steady, though her heart thundered beneath her ribs. "I am no threat," Clara said. "I've taken refuge here, not to weaken your people, but to stand with them. Nawel is my family now." The words hung between them, tentative bridges, attempting to span chasms deeper than the ravines outside the village. The elders summoned their council, a circle carved from ancient logs and lit by flickering firelight. Clara's presence was a riddle that stirred heated whispers. In this assembly, every story held power, every silence spoke volumes. Taina stood by Nawel, her posture both a shield and a spear. "We honor the blood of our ancestors," she said, voice steady but edged. "Yet the laws that bind us must hold." Her presence could invite the wrath of men who would see us all destroyed. The council's murmurs rose, a tide of concern fueled by memory and survival instincts. With fatigue gnawing at his wounds and worry etching lines across his face, Nahuel moved to break the growing tension. With slow, deliberate words, he recounted Clara's journey, her resilience against cruelty, and her courage in standing by his side when the world turned hostile. He spoke not only of love, but of shared fight and survival, a union forged in fire, not convenience. Clara watched the faces around the fire, each marked by hardship, pride, and the ever-present shadow of mistrust. She knew that acceptance here was no simple blessing. It was a battle fought in whispers, in the cadence of gestures, and in fragile acts of faith. As night stretched its dark fingers into the sky, the council's decision was delivered with grave solemnity. Clara's stay was permitted, for now. But the warning was clear. Her presence was a flame that could either light their path or set their village ablaze. The elders' eyes carried the burden of that knowledge, the fine line between protection and peril. In the quiet moments that followed, Taina approached Clara. Her voice was low, a mixture of caution and reluctant respect. "You walk a razor's edge here," she said. "Our people's scars run deep. Trust is earned, not given. But for Nahuel's sake, I will watch your steps, and you will watch yours." Clara nodded, understanding the unspoken challenge. This was her crucible now, not only to protect the man she loved, but to prove herself worthy in a world that had every reason to doubt her. Yet, their fragile peace was shattered unexpectedly when emissaries from the nearby white settlement arrived. A grim envoy, clad in harsh expressions and bitter words. They bore demands veiled thinly in threats, reminding all present of the tenuous peace hanging by frayed threads. Their message was brutal and unambiguous. Stay in line, or face consequences meant to ensure silence. The villagers and Clara listened as the emissaries spoke of hate, suspicion, and a growing impatience with the Apache's tolerated presence. The settlement's leaders saw Clara not as a brave woman choosing her own path, but as a weapon of defiance, an ill omen to be eradicated before it could inspire others. But instead of division, the threat stirred a fragile alliance. Noel, Clara, and even Tanya, once divided by doubt, found common purpose in the shared desire to protect their people and what they had begun to build together. Their unity, though tentative, was a spark amidst the darkening landscape. Then, as the sun faded, a sudden and violent attack descended upon the village. Men from the fort, hardened and merciless, struck without warning. Fires ignited the dry brush, screams pierced the night, and the earth seemed to tremble beneath the fury unleashed. The defenders fought fiercely, but the damage was swift and brutal. Clara fought side by side with Nahuel and Taina, her fear transmuted into raw determination. Every moment hammered home the precariousness of their refuge, how thin the line between sanctuary and siege truly was. Amidst the chaos, Clara's gaze locked with Nahuel's, a wordless promise forged in fire and blood. They were no longer simply survivors. They were warriors, bound by love, resistance, and an unbreakable will. But the cost was high. As the village smoldered, the fragility of their alliance was laid bare. Threats loomed larger than ever, and a new, darker chapter was about to unfold. Beyond the flickering flames, the hunt was far from over. The firelight flickered against the aged faces of the Apache Council, casting long, wavering shadows that danced with the whispered weight of old fears and wary hopes. Clara stood at the edge of the circle, the dry earth beneath her boots, a telling reminder of how far she had come, and how far she still stood from true acceptance. Her voice, steady though laced with the echo of her years of suffering, broke the heavy silence. I have walked through fire and drought, through silence and stones that cut deeper than any blade, she said softly, eyes meeting those of the elders. My scars are not only on my skin, but in the choices I have made just to survive. I stand here not as a visitor, but as one willing to fight beside my family, my people, and protect this land we share. Nawel's sister Tanya watched her with narrowed eyes, the flicker of respect mingling painfully with suspicion. Her arms were crossed as if holding herself together, a fragile barrier between loyalty to her brother and the cautious protection of the tribe's traditions. When Clara's words ended, Tanya's voice cut through the murmurs. You show strength, she admitted, her tone sharp but genuine. But wounds old and new run deep here. The tribe's safety, the laws handed down from our ancestors, they are not easily bent for outsiders, no matter the blood they claim. Clara nodded, the knot in her chest tightening. The room felt smaller than ever, the walls closing in with the invisible burden of history. I do not seek to break those laws, she said. I seek only to show that my loyalty is honest, that backing Nawel is backing all of you. I carry no hidden lies. Silence fell again, interrupted only by the crackling fire and distant calls of night creatures. The elders conferred in low tones, their eyes flickering between Clara and the surrounding faces tattooed by experience and grief. Finally, a grizzled elder's voice rose, worn but firm. For now, the tribe will accept you. But know this, your presence is a fragile flame. It may light the way or torch the village to ash. Walk carefully, Clara. Danger is not just outside our walls, but within the hearts of those who still remember pain. Her pulse throbbed in her throat. The warmth of a reluctant welcome barely touched the cold reality. Her place here was as much a trial as a refuge. Later, Tana stepped beside her away from the council's eyes. Her expression lost some of its severity, replaced with guarded understanding. You walk a razor's edge. I will watch you closely, for Nawel's sake and for the tribe. But you must watch yourself as well. One wrong step, and all we hold dear could fall. Clara met Tana's gaze and offered a quiet nod, the unspoken agreement heavy but binding. She was no longer alone in this territory of suspicion and fractured trust. Their moment was broken by the distant thunder of hoofbeats and harsh voices. From the path leading into the village rode emissaries from the white settlement, their faces sullen and hard as the cracked leather of their saddles. The air grew tense, thick with the dust of looming conflict. The leaders dismounted, stern and unyielding. Their words brought a sharp chill. "The peace here hangs by a thin and worn thread," the foremost spokesman declared, voice heavy with veiled threat. "This woman, Clara, her presence poisons the ground. The town demands order. Either she leaves, or the consequences will fall upon the tribe." The assembly stiffened, the council in heated debate under the flickering firelight. Clara stood beside Nahuel and Tena, intertwining faith, doubt, and fierce determination. "This is our blood," Nahuel said, voice steady as stone. "She is ours as much as we are ours. Threats will not break that." Tena's usual reserve softened into grim resolve. "We must hold together now more than ever. Divided, we fall." Before the night deepened, sudden chaos erupted. Gunshots cracked like thunderclaps, and the dry earth shook beneath the stampede of armed men from the fort. The attackers descended swiftly, mercilessly, setting fire to barns and scattering families. The village erupted into frantic defense, warriors and women alike standing shoulder to shoulder, raising voices and rifles against the cruel onslaught. Clara fought fiercely at Noel's side, her fear transmuted into a searing flame of resistance. Each breath was a battle cry, each heartbeat a drum demanding they survive. Flames leapt toward the starless sky as buildings burned. The air was heavy with smoke and screams. Yet amid the chaos, Clara met Noel's gaze, a steel connection, unspoken but unbreakable. Their bond was no longer just love. It was rebellion, survival, and a blazing hope in the face of destruction. But the cost was undeniable. Fires claimed tents, homes, and history. The tribe's fragile peace was shattered. Trust stretched thin and frayed under the weight of loss. Through the roaring firelight, Clara understood that this attack was more than a strike on the village. It was a declaration. The war over acceptance and belonging was far from over. As the last embers glowed against the blackened ruins, Clara and Noel stood together, the world around them burning. Beyond the smoke and ruin, the hunt for them and for the future they dared to create was only just beginning. The night air was thick with tension as Noel's fierce loyalty propelled him through the shadows toward Redstone's outskirts. The crackle of fire and distant shouts shattered the uneasy silence. His heart pounded, not just for himself, but for Clara, captured and held by her ruthless husband and his men. Every step hummed with urgency. Failure was a void neither could survive. Clara sat bound in the dim, cold room, where the air reeked of sweat and simmering rage. Her husband's seething glare sliced through the flickering candlelight as he barked orders to his men. They surrounded her like vultures circling prey, their faces grim and impatient. Yet behind the despair in Clara's eyes burned a flicker of steel. This confinement could not quell the fire growing inside her. Each taunt from her captors only fed her resolve. Her mind raced, weaving strategies born of desperation and newfound strength. She was no longer the fragile woman who had walked Redstone's dusty streets. The bitter trials she endured had shaped her into something fiercer, an unyielding spirit, aflame with the will to survive and fight. Outside, Nahuel crouched low amidst the scrub, the bitter wind buffeting his dark hair as he traced the faint, telltale signs of the men holding his beloved captive. His breath came in sharp bursts, every sense taut. The haunting knowledge that this rescue mission risked fracturing the fragile peace between their worlds could not bind his determination. He crept closer, calculating each movement, knowing the cost of failure. Every shadow could conceal an enemy. Every step forward tightened the noose around their fate. But Noel did not waver. This was no mere act of defiance. It was a declaration. Clara was no longer a pawn to be owned, but a symbol of resistance and unity between two fractious peoples. The small band of men guarding the house shifted uneasily, their unease palpable even in the darkness. Noel's arrival was no surprise to them anymore. Whispers of the Apache warriors' resolve had spread like wildfire. Yet none foresaw the firestorm of will that would erupt when these two souls' fates collided. With silent command, Noel readied himself. The world held its breath. The first clash was fierce and unrelenting. Steel rang against steel, the acrid scent of gunpowder, mingling with dust and sweat. Noel fought with the strength of a cornered lion, each strike fueled by love and the pain of long-suffered injustice. The men pressed hard, but their brutality only steeled his resolve. Inside, Clara seized the moment, using every ounce of wit sharpened by survival. She wriggled free from one tether. Her hands, though raw, were steady as she grabbed a loose nail from the floorboards, her whispered prayers taking shape in determined action. The sound of Noel's distant battle spurred her on, a reminder that surrender was no longer an option. As one of the guards lunged toward her, she jabbed swiftly, creating the opening she needed. Her escape was not marked by weakness, but by the fierce grit of one who knows the value of life reclaimed. Outside, Nahuel emerged breathless, bloodied but undefeated, meeting Clara's eyes through the flickering lamplight. A wordless vow passed between them. No longer captive, no longer broken. They were prisoners only of a world yet to accept their union. Their flight into the wild was a desperate sprint away from chains old and new. Through thorn and bramble, shadow and moonlight, they fled toward the uncertain sanctuary of the forest, hearts pounding in fierce unison. Nahuel's steps faltered once, pain blooming hot along his side from a wound received in the fray. But Clara's steady grip anchored him. They were now bound irreversibly, not by fear or confinement, but by an unbreakable bond forged in fire. As dawn threatened the horizon, whispers in redstone transformed into thin strands of suspicion and venom. Both white settlers and Apache looked upon their escape as a betrayal, fracturing already fragile alliances. Clara's capture and rescue ignited a blaze of division. Whispers of defiance and danger spread like wildfire. Back in the growing light, the couple's path forward became clearer, yet more perilous. They were no longer passive players, but symbols of resistance, symbols threatening to upend old prejudices and ignite embers of rebellion on both sides. Splitting allegiances deepened the chasms between communities. White men muttered in hushed halls of vengeance, while within the Apache camp, elders debated the risk Clara's presence posed to their survival. Both worlds bristled with fear and suspicion, casting shadows over any chance for peace. Yet amid this isolation, Clara and Nahuel stood together as an unyielding testament to what love could challenge, an immutable force against a backdrop of hatred and division. They were no longer escaping. They were fighting for a future where two worlds might not only collide, but converge. As the sun broke over distant ridges, painting the sky with blood-orange hues, that fragile union was met with scorn from all sides. The hunt that began in anger now turned into a war waged in silent glances, whispered accusations, and the tightening grip of exile. Theirs was a love condemned, marked by betrayal in the eyes of their communities, but born of defiance, strong enough to weather the gathering storm. And as night fell again over Redstone, a cold certainty settled in. The path ahead would be lonely, brutal, and rife with peril. The betrayal felt by both White and Apache divided hearts and hardened forces. Yet Clara and Noel, inseparable now in purpose and passion, would face this exile side by side. The isolation of their love would become the crucible from which a new destiny was forged, one that neither prejudice nor fear could undo. The tension in the air was palpable as Clara and Noel stood side by side, their breaths mingling with the dust that stirred beneath their feet. This was no longer a quiet sanctuary, but the beginning of a rebellion that took root not just in fists or rifles, but in hearts aching for justice and understanding. Taina's hesitant step forward broke the fragile silence embracing them, her eyes reflecting the storm within her. Loyal sister and cautious guardian of a proud people. "I have watched you both," Taina said, voice firm yet not unkind. "The path you walk is dangerous, not just for yourselves, but for all of us. Our tribe remembers old wounds. Your presence, Clara, is both a threat and a hope." Her gaze flickered between them, a silent challenge hanging in the space. "We must stand as one, or fall divided." Clara nodded slowly, every word from Taina carving deeper into her resolve. This was not a gift, but a trial, a fragile peace held just by a thread of faith and wary acceptance. "I do not come to weaken your people," Clara responded, her voice steady despite the tremble beneath. "I come to fight beside them, bound by more than love, by respect, by truth. Noel is my family now, and I will protect this land as fiercely as any Apache." Noel's eyes met her own with fierce pride. "Our strength lies in trust, even when it feels most fragile," he intoned. "We face enemies without and doubts within, but together we stand a chance." The elders gathered then, their faces etched by time and scars deeper than flesh. They spoke softly among themselves, weighing shadows and fears, history and futures. When finally they broke, their verdict was a cautious allowance, with a warning carved in the steady crackle of firelight. "Your presence will ignite fires," one elder warned gravely. "But from such flames, new paths can be forged, paths we must tread carefully. A wrong step, Clara, and the village will face ruin." The night deepened with uneasy murmurs and glances that measured every breath, every movement. Taina approached Clara later, away from council eyes. The unspoken burden passed between them as a silent vow. "You walk the edge of a razor," Taina said quietly. "For Noel's sake, I will watch. But you must be wary. Trust here is earned with every step taken and every word kept. Clara met Taina's gaze squarely, the weight of that promise settling like stone within her. Alone, they would be broken, but together, some hope remained. But the fragile calm shattered as hoofbeats thundered in the distance, carrying with them a storm darker than any before. From the dusty path emerged emissaries from Redstone, their faces hard, eyes cold with distrust and veiled menace. Their arrival cast a shadow, long and cold, over the village. "The peace here hangs by a worn thread," the lead envoy declared, his voice sharp and uncompromising. "This woman, Clara, is a poison that spreads dissent. The settlement demands order. She must leave, or the consequences will fall hard upon the tribe." Murmurs rippled through the assembly like a rising tide. Noel stepped forward, voice steady and low but resolute. "She is mine, as I am hers. Threats will not sever what binds us." Taina's usual reserve softened into grim determination. "Our strength lies in unity. Divided, we are lost." Before the night could swallow their fragile stand, chaos erupted like wildfire. The sharp cracks of gunshots echoed through the valley. The dry earth quaked beneath the stampede of heavily armed men descending upon the village. Flames licked the night sky, devouring dry brush and threatening the homes of those who dared to resist. Clara moved with fierce purpose beside Noel and Taina, transforming fear into raw defiance. Every breath was a whispered prayer, every heartbeat a drum of rebellion against a world bent on their erasure. She fought not as a captive, but as a warrior, bound by love and iron will. Smoke curled upward, shadows twisting into ghosts amid the roaring firelight. The village trembled, its fragile peace torn apart by blades and bullets, screams and ash. Yet amid the chaos, Clara's eyes found Noel's, a steadfast anchor in the maelstrom. Their bond was no longer just a secret flame, but a blazing beacon of unyielding hope. Though the attackers were fierce, the defenders rose stronger. The village rallied, shoulders squared against the storm, voices united in a chorus of resistance. Taina's fierce commands cut through the cacophony, her presence a lifeline for many. But even as the fires died down, their losses were stark. Homes lay smoldering in ruin, the earth beneath, bare and broken. Trust, once tentative, now stretched thinner than ever, threatened not only by outside cruelty, but by the fears gnawing inside. As the last embers glowed against the ink-black sky, a profound truth settled with suffocating weight. This attack was not merely physical. It was a declaration of war on their right to exist together. Beyond the fiery ruins, whispers of vengeance and division grew louder. The tribe's people turned uneasy glances toward Clara, and Redstone settlers huddled in suspicion and anger. Both worlds recoiled, their fractures deepening with every passing hour. But in the quiet between destructions, Clara and Noel stood, hands entwined like unbroken chains. Their love, once condemned, had become the axis on which their battered worlds had to turn. And as dawn's pale light bruised the horizon, the hunting shadow of those determined to destroy them stretched ever closer. The hunt was far from over. The dawn broke over the smoldering ruins of the Apache village, a pale light casting long shadows where fire had not yet consumed the earth. Clara stood beside Nahuel, her hand still tightly entwined with his, their bodies leaning on each other as if the very weight of the world pressed upon their shoulders. Around them, the remnants of their hard-fought refuge bore the scars of violence. Charred beams reached toward the sky like skeletal fingers, and ash hung thick in the still morning air. They had survived the assault, a savage attack meant not only to destroy homes, but to shatter the fragile bonds between their two worlds. Now, as the village struggled to rise from ruin, the deeper fight for acceptance and peace pulsed in their veins like an unextinguished flame. Tana emerged from the gathering crowd, her expression wearied yet resolute. The fierce protector of her brother had fought alongside Clara, their strength forged in the crucible of battle and shared loss. "The attack has torn at the heart of our people," she said, voice steady despite the rawness beneath. "But it has also shown what we must become, united, unyielding." Noel nodded slowly. "Our enemies sought to divide us by fear, to scatter our hope like smoke in the wind. Instead, they have bound us closer." Clara's eyes swept the faces of those around her, warriors, elders, fire of our new beginning. "We will stand together, with the Apache, with those who seek justice beyond the lines drawn in dust and blood." A silence rippled over the crowd, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk circling high above. Then, slowly, tentative nods began to ripple through the throng. The path ahead was perilous. Distrust lingered like a second shadow, and scars ran too deep for easy healing. But in that moment, something fragile and precious took root, a shared resolve to face the future side by side. That day, news reached the outskirts of Redstone. The settlers, fractured and fearful, watched from a cautious distance as the Apache began rebuilding with Clara's aid. Some spoke in bitter whispers, her presence a provocation, a challenge to the old order. Yet others saw, perhaps for the first time, the strength born from unity. Weeks passed. The alliances, once thought impossible, began to stitch themselves into being. Clara walked among the Apache as more than an outsider. She was no longer a symbol of division, but a bridge. Her resilience and courage earned gradual acceptance, and the tribe itself saw her not as a threat, but as an ally. One evening, as the sky was painted in fading hues of orange and purple, Clara and Noel sat beneath the stars, the crackling fire between them a warm heartbeat in the quiet night. Noel traced a finger gently along her hand, his voice low and reverent. "We survived their hatred, their fire, their breaking attempts. But it is here, in the land we share, that our true battle begins. For peace, for understanding, for the respect denied us for so long." Clara looked into his eyes, dark pools reflecting both pain and hope. "Together," she whispered, "we carry the future, not just ours, but everyone willing to see beyond fear and old wounds." The days turned, the season shifted. Life in the frontier remained harsh, but the story of Clara and Noel became legend. A tale of forbidden love, fierce loyalty, and the courage to defy before winter's frost. Clara stood before both the Apache and a hesitant group of settlers. Her voice rang out, steady and enduring. Love crossed borders that no law could bind. Courage rose where voices were silenced, and from these ashes we build, not just homes, but a new world where all can belong. Nauhul stepped beside her, his presence resolute. We hold in our hands not only scars, but the power to heal. Together we stand, not as enemies, but as a people united. A hush fell, then the first tentative applause. Not from all, but from enough. As the sun set beyond the jagged horizon, Clara and Nauhul looked out over a land both familiar and changed. The road behind had been cruel and winding. The future remained uncertain, fraught with challenges hidden in shadows. Yet their love, born of defiance and nurtured through adversity, was an unbreakable bond, a beacon blazing against the gathering dusk. In silence, they made a pact beyond words, to carry on, not just for themselves, but for those who would follow, for the hope that one day the frontier would know peace born of understanding, not fear. And so the chapter closed on their tale, marked by loss, but illuminated by the promise of a dawn yet to come. The saga of Clara and Nauhul became part of the land's soul, a lasting testament to love's power to transcend all boundaries. The frontier remained wild and untamed, but within its fierce embrace, a fragile harmony had taken root. The story was far from over, but for now, a new era had quietly begun.